I will kick this into gear and go directly into a presentation of what is Pryme Time, what are some of the features, and how can they be used. And as Laura mentioned, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A pane on the side. Just click the Q&A button on the top and you can write your questions and we will try to answer as we go along. So going into Business Central, the first thing we'll look at is what we call the better modern timesheet. We made a number of improvements to the timesheet experience, and I'll try to highlight some of those, all with the purpose of making the user more productive, more efficient, and more prone to actually submit time on time, which is the purpose of this. So I'll open up a timesheet and we could open up the timesheet for, let's say, the previous week, because I still haven't done my timesheet for this week, and we can have a look here. And so one of the first things we've added is a new weekday column, which makes it possible to see which day of the week you're tracking time on. We always, of course, had the date, but not all people remember what date a certain day is. So if I know that I'm going to track time on Tuesday, then I can go ahead, select Tuesday, and it will set the date automatically. And of course, the same way, if I've set the date, I can see what day of the week it is. A small thing, but it makes things a lot easier. Next thing is that we made it possible to select by customer. And especially for cases where there are a lot of customers, but they only have a single project each, it might be a lot easier to just write Trey, because I know I have a customer called Trey Research. Trey Research only currently have one active project, so that project will be pre-selected. And then I just need to select what task I worked on. Later, when we get to the roadmap, we will see that we also want to, as a next step, be able to default which task people need to track time on. So in the best of cases, they only need to select the customer and it will pre-select the project and it will pre-select the task. And with that, I'm into being able to select my quantity and write a description. And descriptions is something we'll come back to in just a short minute. But highlights here, new weekday column, possible to select your customers, and it'll pre-select the project for you. Another thing is, of course, that not all people start from a blank slate. They're working according to a plan, according to a resource scheduling done. And that could be because they've self-planned their week with our resource scheduling self-planning capabilities, or it could be that there's a resource manager or some kind of manager who made a plan for them. Maybe they're out at a customer site days at a time and they have a plan for that in their resource scheduling. Why should they start from zero when they enter that timesheet? So for Prakash here, he actually has a plan for what he's supposed to work on this week. And so he can just go in and say, update with work assignments. This will pull in the scheduling and we can see this is all he was scheduled to work on this week. We can also see it in the matrix view where it becomes very clear that he was supposed to work 6 hours per day on specification and 2 hours per day on test and QA these days, and then something different on Monday and Tuesday. So again, a very easy way to get time entries in early on. And of course, there might be a need to adjust and verify that this is correct, but it's a good starting point. Now, these entries, I have not cared so much about the actual descriptions I put in. I've focused on having a good experience for getting the entries in. But the next topic here is extended descriptions. And this is the area where it's actually two separate parts. Let's go into the line view again, and we can see that we have our regular description column, but we also have a field down here called extended description. Now the extended description field down here is optional, but what happens when you enable extended descriptions is that we allow you to enter up to 2,000 characters as a description. So you can write a longer narrative about what you actually did, and maybe that makes the customer a bit more happy about what they are paying for, if they get a good description more than just worked on something. If you actually tell them a little bit more about it, they think they get more value and it's easier to get them to pay the invoice. So in here, you can write a little text, but you can also write multiple lines of text, and it is a multi-text box. And if you use this, then you can have these long blocks of text. This, of course, will follow the whole flow through approval and posting. And in the end, we can add this to a invoice specification if you use the invoice specification. You can also use this as the functionality where you not just enter the description as we see here, but we actually have this button for what we call standard texts. So similar to other places in Business Central where you can select a standard text, we can do that as well. So I'll delete my description and I'll click this button, and we can see that I have two standard texts. I have one for meeting, one for specification. And the idea is, of course, that you make your list of the standard text that you would like to use. And so I could select the one for meeting. And it says meeting regarding topic. And of course, I should put in the topic saying this is Pryme Time with the following participants. And this is Stefan and Stina and Laura, etc. So I can add that as a long list. And so I can have these templated experiences where I have something to start with, especially for junior people. It might be a good starting point, and it makes sure that people write good descriptions, again, that make customers happy. We can also make rules in these. So I could say here, if I say it was a meeting about bugs, or let's say a bug in Pryme Time, we can see here that'll highlight the word bug because I made a rule saying, please warn people about saying that something was a bug. Maybe we would like to address it as an issue. It could also be swear words, words of competing products, something like it's free or anything. And it can either be words or phrases that we highlight. And we can either block those or we can warn about them. In this case, we just highlight it, and whenever I leave the line and go to another line, it'll likely pop up and say, consider if you need to use the following word, bug. And I say, okay, I'm okay with that, but at least I wasn't made aware of it. So some cases, this can be a really handy feature to make sure that you don't get text out to the customer that you don't want them to see. So moving on from this, these were some enhancements to the standard timesheet experience and the possibility to, of course, also have these descriptions, which again flow through the whole process. Now, we have another way of tracking time as well. And so if I go out of the timesheet and back to my role center, we can have a look at what we call time tracking with start-stop timers. And the start-stop timer concept is, of course, new, but now we've integrated it into Business Central, and we can open up time tracking. Sorry, this was the wrong slide. So going back here, we have what we call time tracking entries. Somebody would call it a timer, but I call it time tracking entries. And this is a list of what you did during the day. We can see here that I already tracked some time. And this was from 8 to 9:40, 8:49. And I could add a new entry in here and say, I would like to start a timer. And then it starts a timer at 9:14. And I can say, this is my demo meeting. And I've already started the timing, so I'm sure that I'm capturing all the time. And then I can go ahead and say, well, who was this for? Well, this was again for, let's say, the trade research. And so I have the project and I can select that this was part of a client meeting. I have all this. But again, the idea is I'm sure to capture all my time. I start my timer. And at any point in time, I can stop my timer and it'll record when I stopped. And it will, of course, record how much time is tracked in general. Now, Of course, now there's 0 minutes, so it doesn't add up to anything in this case. But let's say that I actually remember to start this on time. I can always go back and say, actually, we started this meeting at, yeah, let's just put in, I started it at 9. And so it corrects it. And now I have 15 minutes tracked. And oh, I should remember to start this again, so it keeps ticking. So a very handy feature. And of course, I can also go back during this and make changes. And over time, I'll get a history of what I did. And if I make multiple changes, these will be tracked as individual starts and stops. We can see at the end here that there's a small mark saying create time entry. And this means that we will create a time entry from this later on. So you can have this and track all you do in the day. Again, when we get back to the roadmap, we will see that we would like to do this as a bit smaller, nicer UI that you can pop out. But at the moment, it's this list experience. But what do you do with your time tracking entries? Well, of course, you add them into your timesheet. So this is my current timesheet, and I can simply go in and say, update create time entries. And we can see that it has pulled in the entries that I created from the beginning. And here, I can, of course, adjust and say, well, actually, I would like to put half an hour on this, even though I didn't track much time. So I'm still free to control what the final quantity is. We can also see that it takes a track time and converts it into a decimal number of hours. And you control how that conversion is done. Is there any rounding of this in any way or form? Do we round to the nearest 15 minutes, nearest half hour? How do we do that? In this case, we are quite conservative and round to the nearest 3 minutes, which is, of course, 0.05 of an hour. So this is one way. And still in here, I have my start stop buttons. So I can do the same in here and I can start this again. I can stop it again. And even, of course, if I make a manual entry for something in here and say, again, I have my tray research and now it was the same project. And again, maybe this was for some development. And yes, I can go in and I can start my timer from here. So if you don't want to use a separate page for time tracking, you can do it from in here. And there's, of course, a setting to turn off the start-stop timer functionality if you don't want it to clutter up your UI with additional fields. You set it, and then it hides those fields. So this is the tracking functionality. Now, what happens if people don't submit their time and just sit around? And we see that as a common case. We want to send reminders. We want people to submit their time, and we want to help them do this. So this brings up the next topic, email reminders and submissions. So what can we do there? Well, we have a function now to send out an email. We had that in the past, but now it's actually a nice looking email with some good details on it. And the way we start this when we do it from the UI is that we run an email timesheet reminder report. In most cases, you would run this as a scheduled job. You would do it maybe on Monday mornings. But I'll just do it here and we will see the email coming out. So this will send out emails for timesheets that have not been submitted but should have been submitted. And that should send an email to me, and I'll have to wait a minute or two before the email pops up in my mailbox. So yes, there it is. And it tells me here that, hi Prakash. Well, that's because that's a logged in user. The week has ended. Please submit your timesheet. You have entered 39 hours, which is one less than expected. So it also keeps track of the norm time. And then it lists what I actually have on my timesheet in here. So I can verify that, yes, this is maybe right. I'm actually starting doing something. And if this turns out to be correct, I can just press the Submit Now button. And this will then submit the timesheet. I can also press the Review and Adjust. That just links me back to the timesheet. So let's try the Submit Now button and see what that does. So that sends me in the background to Business Central, it says, do you want to submit the timesheet? And I have to say yes. And of course, then when I say yes, then my timesheet is submitted. So we do have to have an action in there to avoid having a link that just does it for you. We want to have that confirmation, and now my timesheet is submitted, and I can close my window, and then I'm back again. So very easy and very, again, proactive from the company to the user saying, please take action. We're trying to help you submit your time on time. Well, most of the features in here are focused on the productivity. We also want to give something to the management side. And one of the things we've added is the resource forecast. And you can say, why the resource forecast? Well, it's because it's something that ties into the time experience. Again, I showed how you could create time entries from your resource planning, your resource scheduling. And of course, that means that you have to have good resource scheduling in order for this to be useful. So we added some more reports, and we're starting with the resource forecast. There will be additional reports coming, helping to make sure that you plan better and have a better tracking of what people are going to do and what they've actually done. But let's start out with the resource forecast. It's in here in the menu, and we can open this up. So this is a resource forecast. And here we show a forecast of what people are scheduled to work on. So I'm having this in a week view, and we can see for each group of people, in this case consultants, how much time are they scheduled to work on for coming weeks, and also, of course, for each individual. And we color coded, of course, to say these are good looking, they're in the green, they're almost fully scheduled, but out here we need to schedule some more work for people. Here it's almost at a reasonable level. We can look at this either as hours, but we can also use it for a more monetary analysis and switch over and say we would like to look at amounts up here. So switching between hours and amounts, and then it switches to amounts. And we can again decide to either view only those projects that are on order, but also we could include whatever is in a quote state, again, in this view as fields, which shows order or quote. Now I don't have anything in quote, so it doesn't show me anything, but on order it will. So starting point here, we are not finished with the reporting story. We're just getting started here, but we really want to expand on this area. So I mentioned a few times that we are still getting started. We have delivered a lot of different functionality, but we want to deliver more. And so that brings me to the roadmap. And so what does the roadmap look like? Well, we're keeping it short for now. We're looking at a 3-month roadmap, or actually a 3-release roadmap, meaning June, August, and October. Of course, there will be changes after that, but we're trying to, as this is a new product, really make sure that we deliver new functionality relatively quickly. And so for June, we want to have some more features about defaulting values. In this case, it will be the default task. So you can pre-select for a given project what is the default task, so people don't have to enter that. That makes a lot of sense for projects where you have a small structure and there's only a few tasks to select, and one will usually be the one. That also ties in with one of the functionalities we have added that I haven't shown, where we can default the work type on entries. So that more or less completes that circle. Then we want to add some visual time tracking. So visualizing your week in a graphical form, a bit like an Outlook calendar, in the same way as we've done in the resource scheduling. And that will also allow us to create time entries from Outlook, because we will show your Outlook appointments in that view. Of course, we already have the capability to create time entries from Outlook, but in that way, currently it's a push model where you have to go into each of the assignments or the appointments in Outlook and say, I would like to create a time entry from it. Here we're looking at a push model where people, and maybe those that are tracking a bit behind when they actually did the work, they can say, this was my calendar, and I want to take this appointment, this appointment, and this appointment, and put it onto my timesheet in one go. After the summer or the end of summer in August, we want to expand on the reporting story. So some more stories around expected achievements, what degree of client time, how much is the utilization, etc. do we expect from people, and then of course being able to analyze that both on a time analysis basis, but also on a monetary basis, looking at the amount. We also want to improve the standard text experience. There are some tweaks we can do there to make it even more efficient. And come October, the big ticket item there is the pop-out time tracker. We hope to be able to deliver an experience where you will have a small window where you can do your start-stop tracking in without having the full BC experience with all the Chrome around it. So that concludes the presentation. If there are any questions, please ask them now.
No questions so far? Thank you, Aske, for that comprehensive demo on Pryme Time. And well, if we don't have any questions, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And of course, if you have a question on the app at a later point, you can reach out anytime. That's it for now. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful day. See you. Cheers.